There's a moment after someone leaves that feels almost unbearable. It's not always the silence that hurts. It's the noise in your own mind. You replay every conversation, every red flag you ignored, every apology you gave just to keep the connection alive. And the question always comes back the same. Why did they leave? You'll cycle through theories. Maybe they changed. Maybe you weren't enough. Maybe if you had done something differently, been softer, less intense, more patient, they would have stayed. This question will haunt you until it becomes a belief that their absence is proof of your failure, that their rejection is a judgment of your worth. But what if you're asking the wrong question? The deeper truth is this: the real pain often isn't that they left. It's that you stayed in something that didn't feel right for too long, that you ignored the emptiness, the confusion, the quiet ache that something was wrong, and you kept showing up anyway. You held on so tightly to who you thought they could be, that you abandoned who you actually were. This is where the conversation has to shift. Not toward blame, but toward ownership. Because when you keep asking, why did they leave? You're still giving your power to someone else. But when you ask, why did I stay when I knew I was being slowly broken? You start to take your power back. It's not about punishing yourself. It's about seeing clearly, the version of you who tolerated what you didn't deserve, hoping love would fix it. Many of us stay, not because of love, but because of potential. We fall in love with the possibility of someone. We believe if we just keep trying, if we keep forgiving, if we pour more of ourselves into the cracks, they'll eventually see us, value us, choose us. But in the process, we're teaching ourselves that our worth is conditional, that we must suffer to be loved, that peace must be earned. That's not love. That's self-abandonment disguised as loyalty. Rejection is painful because it shines a light on every place where we silenced ourselves. It mirrors our hesitation to speak up, the boundaries we let slide, the parts of us we downplayed just to avoid conflict. It shows us the cost of trying to be chosen by someone who never truly saw us, and how, in the process, we started to forget how to choose ourselves. This video isn't about shaming you for staying. It's about freeing you from the story that someone else's departure defines your value. The real question isn't, why did they leave? It's, why did I keep giving chances to someone who kept showing me who they were? That shift, from why they left to why you stayed, is where healing begins. It's not easy. It requires courage. But it's also the moment your story changes. Because once you reclaim that question, you're no longer waiting for closure. You're writing it. And that's where your power lives, not in being chosen, but in finally choosing yourself. We rarely fall in love with reality. We fall in love with potential, with what we hope someone could become, with the version of the relationship we play in our heads late at night, not the one that leaves us feeling hollow when we wake up. And when those two versions don't match, we don't walk away. We dig in deeper. We believe if we love them hard enough, wait long enough, or heal enough, they'll finally transform into the person we always believed they were capable of becoming. But that hope, that beautiful, dangerous hope, is often the reason we stay too long. It's not always fear. It's not always weakness. Sometimes it's belief. A belief that love can fix everything. A belief that people change when you show them enough grace. A belief that you can endure a little more discomfort if it means eventually getting the fairy tale ending. The truth is, potential is seductive. It gives you something to chase. It keeps you focused on a future version of someone while ignoring the present reality. And that chase becomes addictive. You tell yourself, it wasn't always like this, or they just need time, or if I leave now, maybe I'll miss the best version of them. And those thoughts keep you stuck, not because they're true, but because they give you a reason to keep giving. But while you're waiting for someone to become who you imagined, you're slowly becoming someone you never meant to be. You're quieter, more anxious. You second-guess yourself before you speak. You apologize for things that shouldn't require an apology. You suppress your needs to protect their comfort. And somewhere along the way, you begin to think that this is what love is supposed to feel like. Exhausting, unpredictable, conditional. That's not love. That's erosion. And it's why potential becomes such a dangerous drug. Because it tricks you into tolerating patterns that betray you. Just because you remember the spark from the beginning, or because you believe in the story you've already built around the person. Many people stay in the wrong relationship, not out of dependency, but out of emotional investment. You don't want to give up. You don't want to start over. You've already seen glimpses of who they could be, and walking away feels like quitting on that version. But here's the hard truth. If someone only shows you their best when they fear losing you, then that's not growth. That's manipulation. Real change is consistent. It's effort without being asked. It's care that doesn't vanish when things get hard. And if you keep waiting for someone's potential to save the relationship, you'll miss all the red flags waving in your face, the inconsistency, the neglect, the dismissal of your feelings, the small cuts that never get addressed. You can't build a future with someone who only exists in your imagination. And the longer you try, the more you lose touch with your reality, your needs, your values, your boundaries. You don't stay because you're blind. You stay because you see too much of what could be. But healing begins when you stop asking who they might become and start asking who you've become in the process of waiting. And if the answer to that question is someone more anxious, more unsure, more invisible, then it's time to stop chasing their potential and start choosing your own. There's a quiet kind of damage that happens when you stay in the wrong place for too long. It doesn't scream, it doesn't break things, it whispers, in doubts, in silences, in the way you start hesitating before speaking your truth. It's not always obvious, but it's there. The moment you begin choosing someone else's comfort over your own clarity, the unraveling begins. At first it feels noble. You're being patient, understanding. You tell yourself love requires sacrifice, and you pride yourself on your ability to endure. You hold back your pain to keep the peace. You explain things they never try to understand. You forgive actions they never truly regret. You minimize your needs so they won't feel overwhelmed. And then, something shifts. You start apologizing for asking for what you deserve. You start walking on eggshells, not because you're fragile, but because you're afraid of how they'll react to your strength. You adjust your tone, your timing, your truth, just to keep the connection alive. And in doing so, piece by piece, you disappear. That's the price of self-abandonment. It doesn't look like destruction from the outside. It looks like survival. It looks like you showing up, smiling, loving harder, while something inside you quietly breaks. The version of you that once felt bold, intuitive, unfiltered, starts to fade into a version that's more tolerable, more agreeable, more acceptable to someone who never truly accepted you. You might not notice it right away. You'll still function. You'll still get through the day. But you'll start feeling it in your body, in the tightness in your chest before you speak, in the anxiety before their moods shift, in the exhaustion that no sleep seems to fix. Because when you silence yourself for too long, your nervous system starts to scream the truth you've been holding in. The most dangerous part, you start to normalize it. You start believing that needing less, feeling less, saying less, makes you easier to love. You train yourself to accept crumbs and call it connection. You confuse emotional starvation with strength. You forget what it felt like to be full of your own voice, your own worth, your own sense of peace. And the longer you stay, the harder it is to leave. Not because of the love, but because of the version of yourself you'd have to face. The one who stayed quiet. The one who knew better but hoped harder. The one who saw the signs and kept showing up anyway. Facing that part of you requires grief. Real grief. Not just for the relationship, Carl, but for all the ways you betrayed yourself trying to make it work. But grief is not weakness. It's a doorway. And on the other side of that grief is the version of you that remembers. Remembers what it means to be whole. Remembers what it means to speak without fear. Remembers that love should never cost you your identity. So no, you're not broken. You're just buried. Under years of making yourself small enough to fit into places never meant for your becoming. And when you finally stop abandoning yourself for someone else's potential, you'll realize the version of you were sacrificing for love was the one you needed to love first. There comes a point when asking why no longer brings healing, only exhaustion. Why they treated you that way, why they couldn't love you the way you loved them, why they changed, why they left. These questions spiral in on themselves, looping in your mind until they start to feel like identity. But they don't bring peace, they just keep you tethered to a version of yourself that only exists in reaction to someone else's choices. The truth is, why can become a trap. It promises understanding but rarely delivers freedom. You can dissect their childhood, their trauma, their triggers. You can rationalize their emotional unavailability or blame their past for their inability to show up. But none of that changes what they did, or more importantly, what you allowed. Eventually, the question has to shift. The real turning point in healing doesn't come when you find the perfect explanation for why it all happened. It comes when you finally ask, how did I let it last this long? Not from a place of self-punishment, but from deep self-honesty. How did I ignore the signs? How did I justify the neglect? How did I silence my intuition, my boundaries, my needs? And most importantly, how do I never do it again? This is where transformation begins. When you start replacing rumination with responsibility. When you begin seeing your past not as a series of mistakes, but as a map. A map that shows where you gave too much, stayed too long, forgave too quickly, and forgot yourself too easily. It's not about assigning blame. It's about reclaiming agency. Because when you stop asking why they did what they did, and start asking how you will protect your peace going forward, something fundamental shifts. You stop waiting for closure and start creating boundaries. You stop needing explanations and start building standards. You stop handing out unearned loyalty and begin honoring your own capacity to choose again, wiser this time. That doesn't mean you'll never feel pain again. Of course you will. Healing isn't immunity, but it means the next time you feel discomfort, you'll recognize the signs earlier. You'll know the difference between patience and self-neglect, between compassion and self-erasure, between love and emotional labor that isn't yours to carry. Because growth isn't just about becoming someone new. It's about no longer betraying who you were always meant to be. It's about learning how to stop mourning people who didn't mourn you. Learning how to rebuild trust, not just in others, but in your own ability to walk away. Learning how to live with grief, not as an anchor, but as a teacher. So stop asking why they left. Ask how you can now protect the version of you who stayed, hoping, enduring, believing. And finally, let that version be held by someone who never leaves again. You. Closure is one of the most painful illusions we chase. We think if we just had one more conversation, if they would finally explain, finally apologize, finally admit they were wrong, then we could let go. We imagine the perfect ending like it's owed to us. But the truth is, closure isn't something you get from them. It's something you give to yourself when you finally accept that you'll never get the apology your soul deserved. Sometimes they won't own what they did. They won't feel remorse. They won't even understand the damage they caused, because they were never in it the way you were. And that's what hurts the most. You thought you were building something sacred, but they were only visiting a place you called home. But you're allowed to stop waiting. You're allowed to stop rehearsing imaginary conversations in your head, trying to find the right words that will finally make them see you. You've already been carrying their silence for too long. You don't need their validation to confirm what you already know, that you stayed longer than you should have, gave more than you received, and lost yourself while trying to prove you were worthy of being kept. The chapter doesn't close when they say it's over. It closes when you stop rereading the same page, the one filled with justifications, almosts, and emotional IOUs that were never repaid. Healing starts when you accept that their absence is no longer your wound. It's your release. Their silence is no longer your responsibility. It's your space to finally hear your own voice again. And their inability to love you doesn't mean you're unlovable. It means they were never capable of meeting the version of you that now refuses to settle. You don't need their regret. You need your rebirth. Let the version of you who begged for understanding finally rest. Let the version of you who settled, who stayed, who hoped, be thanked and then released. They got you this far, but they're not meant to carry you forward. The new chapter doesn't begin with someone else choosing you. It begins with you choosing yourself, loudly, fiercely, and without apology. So no, you don't need closure. You need to walk away without looking back. Not because you've forgotten what happened, but because you've remembered who you are.